Every time a train leaves the station, there is an unspoken promise by us to each passenger to get them to their destination safely. And that's a promise we make 3 million times a day. Among the biggest threats to this promise are signals passed at danger, SPADs. Let's get things straight. SPADs are a simple issue, right? I mean, 86% are caused by driver error, right? So all we've got to do is get drivers to be a bit more careful, right? Wrong. SPADs are far from a simple issue.
The purpose of this programme is to help facilitators to undertake the detailed assessment stage of the Overrun risk assessment procedure. The programme includes extracts from each of the 6 key stages of the detailed assessment workshop, as well as helpful feedback from the participants. The importance of the workshop and its role in the Overrun risk assessment procedure cannot be overstated. The results generated from these workshops are expected to have a progressive and significant national impact on reducing SPAD risk. The detailed assessment is not just another workshop. The key success factor for the workshop is preparation. Inadequate preparation will inevitably result in valuable workshop time being wasted and the failure to complete the detailed assessment workload.
Physical environment, I think, is very important, and in any sort of textbook on workshops, you know, the temperature of the room, certainly even from an observer's point of view, as the day went on, I was getting tired, and it's not surprising that people get tired because there's a lot of intense thinking that goes into answering these questions, and you know, you can almost see and hear the brain going tick, 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 you know.
To get the best out of the workshop, there are 3 key points to consider: venue, equipment, and the physical comfort of the participants. As the workshop is likely to be a regular occurrence, it's most important that the venue chosen is easily accessible and is big enough without being too big. The presentation of the data and other information requires the right presentation equipment, a laptop and data projector, but it's worth having an overhead projector and slides as a backup in case things go wrong. Because the workshops demand sustained concentration from the participants, it's vital that the venue is comfortable, neither too hot nor too cold, and free from distracting noise.
The line standard looks for competencies, and thank goodness somebody has actually listed some of those competencies that you've already stated you have. So that highlights the fact that we do have an experienced team sitting around this table on an experience and expertise in railway business. Okay.
The selection of attendees is a very important factor. As the collective brain of the workshop, they must represent the key competencies necessary to undertake the assessment. You should ensure that the participants are properly briefed before attending the workshop so that they can come fully prepared to undertake a key role.
The ground rules I've got posted up there, okay. The second one I've got there is, please respect other people's points of view as we go around today. Everybody's view is important, okay, and there may be something in what they're saying which you think is irrelevant, but nobody else is actually caught onto. You might think, yes, I already know that, but it's a learning process for them as well, okay. There are some new people here who have not done risk assessments before. It is a one meeting and one speaker type of meeting, okay, as you can tell that just now. But we don't want people away discussing maybe a little story that they've got to tell their neighbour, okay. Try and keep it focused on the speaker and the action at that time.
It's important to overcome initial apprehension and get the group working together. The group dynamics involve establishing levels of trust in newly formed working relationships.
I'm very good at going off on them, as you might well appreciate. Right. Let's say this type of a risk assessment is a lot more desk orientated prior to the workshop, okay? So there's a lot of fact gathering can be done before it, all right? So that when we do actually have the workshop, we're actually concentrating on opinions and views rather than actual facts which are already determined, okay?
Each participant should be given a briefing pack containing all the data and other information necessary to be fully briefed on the signals or locations in the case of new projects. Detailed guidance on the briefing pack contents is given in the assessment procedure.
A hell of a lot of the pre-preparation work can be done which will not require the workshop necessarily to go through all 16 questions and all subsets of them, because a lot of the things which you can get from the signalling diagrams and you can get from a photograph can be done in advance. And I guess we would have gone through 141 probably in 15 minutes max instead of 75.
The contents of the briefing pack should also be incorporated on a PowerPoint display so that the participants are focused on the relevant information at the right time. The presentation should also include the appropriate signalling schematic or scheme plans for ease of reference. Key documents within the briefing pack are the Human Factors Questionnaire and the Mitigation Measures Pro Forma. Be acutely aware of the need to use workshop time wisely and to make best use of available expertise.
What is the SAT signal assessment tool? It's basically just a numerical analysis of conflicts at a junction, taking into account how far the junction is ahead of the signal. The inputs are an analysis of conflicts, the number of trains on the signal that we consider might be spadded, and also on set routes ahead of that signal. The probability that the points will be set for the conflict, because, for example, there's flank protection in some locations, and there may be other locations where just generally the live points will be set for a more benign route than the worst case collision scenario. We'll also look at the speed of trains on the layout, the length of trains, and the loading of trains. The purpose of all that, obviously, is to determine the consequences of a collision if one was to occur. The outputs will be a collision frequency score, a collision consequence score, and a risk score, which is really the numbers that we're going to get to grips with today. There'll be a raw risk score, which is basically just the output of the signal assessment tool. We'll also look at one which is adjusted for the variable SPAD probability, because when we ask the questions about the factors relating to the signal, the sort of qualitative part of a risk assessment, that is actually tied into a model that will give us a variation figure on the normal SPAD probability. So instead of us guessing is the probability of a SPAD at that signal higher or lower, the factors that we've identified as we go through the V-SPAD questionnaire will actually give us that number, and all we need to do is answer the questions yes or no. So it's quite a simple process there.
In conjunction with the SAT assessor, you'll have prepared the preliminary results. These have been entered on the Detailed Assessment Workshop Pro Forma and will be included in the briefing pack. The results will include the raw SAT score and initial responses to the relevant questions and the existing mitigation measures. These results and responses are illustrated by means of a bar chart which clearly shows the risk scores before and after mitigation measures.
Yeah, you've probably noticed if you've read through the pack that we've fortunately have gone through and answered all those that are actual matters of fact or are based on simple, easy to make judgments. But where there's a more complex judgment to make, then we want the workshop to answer those questions. And we also very much, if you've gone through the packs and you see something where we've ticked yes and you think it's no, then we do need to debate that point. But we will not go through each question unless you draw our attention to one that you weren't happy with, or the question hasn't been answered.
Together with the workshop participants, you can now review any assumptions made as well as results and responses in the pro forma. Attention will also be drawn to any particular ambiguities or complexities in the preliminary results.
Newton, Kirkhill Junction, strangely enough. The outputs, as you can see, are figures that we can actually look at and we can compare the risk. You can see the histogram there actually shows the different signals. These are the junction signals on the layout and the relative risk scores. That you can see, for example, that Mike 156 signal at Newton is extremely high score in comparison to the rest of the signals.
Well, there is first of all the preamble which sets out why we're doing Filton and the assumptions that have been made. There is then the diagram of the present and proposed layouts and the route conflict table and the distance to clearing point tables for the present and proposed, and also the SATs for the individual 4 signals that have been assessed using that method for both the present and the proposed.
Okay, don't worry, don't get too hung up about all that technical stuff at the back. I think we have to assume from the point of view of the exercise that that is what the numerics are. That's done. Laurie's done that. We're not here to check Laurie's number crunching. What we are here to do is the first couple of pages is to quickly review that his basic assumptions that he's used to get those numbers are about right. When the workshop's had chance to see your presentation and review of results, they can endorse the results as well as amending or adding any additional response. At this stage, it's important to apply the collective expertise of the participants. Your objective is to ensure that this expertise is rigorously employed to achieve a robust understanding, appreciation and recognition of the risk issues. The consensus of expertise and local knowledge can then be used to develop practical risk mitigation responses.
What they call secondary consequences, right, of that. I think I gave an example in the briefing pack was that if there is a tunnel ahead and the SPAD occurred in the tunnel, then the secondary consequences are that the collision actually could become much worse because the tunnel roof is compacting on the impact, and also the emergency services and people escaping is impeded. So is there anything in these last 2 signals that reflect on that? Like, you know, there's no embankments for the train carriages to roll down and there's no tunnels there?
You'll need to promote consideration of secondary consequences, particularly if signal locations involve tunnel or steep embankments. Historical incidents such as the Severn Tunnel and Purley have shown the importance of considering secondary consequences. At this stage, it's time to seek consensus agreement to the implementation of the most effective measures. At some locations, it may not be appropriate to have multiple mitigation measures where one measure alone may significantly reduce or eliminate risk.
There's one risk area in there. There's obviously several ways in which you can deal with it. I would suggest that approach maybe is relevant, although it's not practical, because there's probably more effective means of doing it.
But what I'm saying here is there isn't a way of setting those points beyond the overlap to provide the safest path. What you've got here is a train signal from Mike 138 to 146, right?
Right, okay, yeah.
And 139 is sparred. How can you change the points? The points are set for that route.
Well, you can look back and see where the train, because I mean, don't forget there's double flashing double yellows and all the rest of it approaching, so this route could be set long before the train actually arrives.
Yes, yeah. Well, hence you maybe look at, as soon as Mike 139 is overlap is...
Yeah, I mean, you could pull up 138 and normalise the points, depending on where the train is on its approach. Can you get 19 points across?
But you're talking about somebody else reacting to it rather than the
What you could do, the
overlap.
Do it.
Yeah.
Potentially it could be done by the interlocking.
Yeah, well, as soon as he goes on to the overlap
Yeah, you're going to stop.
track circuit, it either throws something back
I
to
think
the
it's a
engine.
case, it may be relevant, but I don't think it's practical.
Well, that's one
Because I think
This is
it
about
screws up
setting
the
the
West
points,
Coast Main
isn't it?
Line.
So we
Upline.
move on, let's just say it's
Yeah.
relevant and
Right,
not
okay.
practical. Although you have to be careful not to count
Yes.
complementary mitigations as a total. It might be that together 2 things aren't equal to as much as there was one thing that was. You can't just count them up and say forget about the expensive one because always
More
cheap on
reasons.
it. Yeah.
In this case, they've got headspans. I mean, some of them you don't have the headspans. You've got the kind of, you know, they just have the cantilevers. So I mean, I appreciate. I just feel that unless cab riding or whatever dictates that it's difficult to find markers there. If it's a featureless bit of track,
Well, it is.
Well, it is, that's what we're saying.
Blank there. Look at it. It's like a desert.
Driver hammering along at 70, 80 miles an hour is not looking at the overhead gantries with the best will in the world.
He's trying to
well,
pick
they
out
ought to
his
be
signal
doing-
there.
Yeah, but we're talking about a guy going past a single yellow, going up to a red with 400 yard sighting. You know.
Can I point out from a driving perspective as well that when a driver's trying to break a train coming up to a red signal, the last thing he's doing is playing countdown.
Right.
You
so what
haven't
for riding
got
then?
time to sit there and count gantries. This is where we were at Paddington with Ladbroke Grove. Drivers, because the signals were
But you could apply that
obscured.
argument to countdown markers too.
Countdown
because
markers are in your face. Countdown
He's now
markers
looking
are
for
at
them.
300
You can
yards,
see them.
and it's giving you a specific message.
He knows how far
You're
they are
300
away.
yards from the signal. You're 200
Yeah, I mean,
yards
I'm
from the
not
signal.
arguing against the use of countdown markers in certain places. All I'm
Yes,
arguing,
you
We
are.
need to.
all I'm saying is that how can we be? What factor is
We
it
need
in
to
this
move on.
layout that
We need
actually
to move on, 'cause
says that it's relevant? I'm not convinced we've
I don't
got.
feel
Alan,
there's
if we
there's
ever,
not
if we
consent.
ever get a spad there, I'll wager you, and God forbid, I hope we don't, but I'll wager you it's a misjudgment type spad we get.
Aye, it's more likely.
More unlikely that type.
Purely on the fact that you don't normally stop.
Yeah,
at the signal.
but why? My question is why that signal and not any other signal?
Because the risks are higher.
This is the only one we've looked at on the West Coast Main Line.
No, it doesn't have to be a high risk. It could be the lowest risk. The fact is, it's the fact that when the driver is sitting there, he is doing possibly 40 miles an hour, gone by a single yellow. He is looking at what you're looking now. He's doing 40 mile an hour, and he's trying to figure out how much brake do I need to give this train to stop at a place I can't even see.
So what's the difference?
There is
with what
nothing
I'm
there
saying?
that's assisting that
Can I just
driver.
put an end to
Available
this?
for us,
Can I
but-
put an end to this? We've debated it long enough.
There may be certain situations and circumstances that warrant immediate mitigation measures to be implemented, such as locations in the steady state category. Any immediate implementation of measures should feature in the recommendations.
Take the ones first that you know you're going to get done fairly quickly, i.e. painting posts, countdown markers, because they will bring down your risk. Regardless, you can do the others. Sticking 3 countdown markers up and whacking a bit of paint costs nothing in comparison to major works. Yeah, but you know your risk is then coming down.
Can I suggest then a collection here of relocate the SPT, paint the signal post and put up countdown markers, which total 60, right, but call it 40, because all that together isn't equal to the total. Right, call that 40, and then the longer term you've got a 70% reduction overall, which would include your TPWS. So that would see that come down from 1400 down to 800 initially, and then down to about 400.
Once agreement is reached on specific measures to be implemented, you'll be able to illustrate the impact of the measures in reducing the risk by means of amending the bar charts. By using their collective expertise, the workshop should now be able to agree that the risk assessment has been clearly followed, that the SAT results have been fully evaluated, that the mitigation measures represent the most practicable solutions to reduce risk, and that the measures have reduced the risk to a level that is as low as reasonably practicable. In other words, a LARP. The idea of a LARP here is where the workshop eventually come to a consensus that we agree that there is nothing more that is reasonably practical to recommend.
It's the square circle. Can you get anything else to mitigate that down quicker than you're going to get TPWS in?
Well,
You can double block.
in a sense, I like to set my mind round 2 issues, right, on any signal is SPAD prevention and SPAD mitigation, right, which are 2. TPWS is a SPAD mitigation measure. Once a SPAD happens, it's trying to prevent any consequences of that SPAD. What we are trying to do also is prevent the SPAD happening in the first place, because it's no use us having TPWS everywhere and having 5,000 SPADs next year.
Have we got it down to the mitigation we can do prior to TPWS as low as we can? And is there anything we can do prior to TPWS that will bring it down lower?
I don't think...
Because there's no point in going through the process of putting in overlaps, double blocking and everything else when we ain't even going to get to the design stage before TPWS.
I would like to, I mean, apart from double blocking or reducing the line speed, neither of which I think are particularly acceptable.
You're talking about double blocking by instruction rather than double blocking in the interlock.
Aye.
Well, that's just
no, but I mean, if you said that risk wasn't low enough, if you weren't happy to say that's ALARP, then you would have to recommend that you did something
then
in the
you need
interim.
to do a risk assessment to risk assess the chance of the signal or not obeying instruction.
Yeah. By which time TPWS has been...
Yeah, if we feel it's
Because if
necessary,
you're going to risk assess it for the driver, then you have to risk assess it for the signal.
I think we're going to take it any further.
Was substantially high, and you didn't think it was ALARP, then the line speed reduction or double blocking would have to be considered. Those, I think, about the easiest to implement in the shortest possible time scale. But I don't think, it's not my opinion that this signal justifies it.
If the 3 mitigation measures we took had knocked that down by about 5%, and we looked at it and the graph only just dropped down, then we would have had to seriously start saying it's double blocking by instruction, it's a TSR one, because the actual drop wouldn't have been anywhere near enough for us to put our hand on our hearts and say, well, that's okay, TPWS will knock that out.
Is everybody happy with that position?
Yeah. I mean, I feel you couldn't put on a TSR without looking at the timetable effects, because there'd be no point putting a TSR and then find you build yourself a lot more conflicts, you know. It would defeat the purpose.
I'm looking for nods of agreement. I mean, we've had a bit of a debate about that. It's a difficult question to answer. Does anybody can ask this question then, because it kind of forces anybody who doesn't agree. If you don't agree that the package of measures in the short term and then TPWS in the long term would present ALARP, best to ask it as a negative question, because if anybody feels that, then they need to say no.
The only proviso I would put in is I'm not out on a limb here. Yes, I think we've done as much as we can. Yes, TPWS will mitigate this down even further, subject to everything else. But stick something in the notes that says if there's a delay in TPWS coming in, we will visit this with a view to putting in instructions as for double blocking and everything else.
And there's also a caveat about TPWS effectiveness until we...
That's it. In other words, we've considered everything, and we've even considered past the point of TPWS implementation, is that if that doesn't happen on the timescales that were agreed, we'll then look at further mitigation measures to bring it down.
During the workshop, a comprehensive record will have been kept by an appointed recorder. The recorder will assist you in the production and circulation of a final report, which will provide an important audit trail and record of the risk-assessed signals. The report should be concise and accurate, stating the recommendations made. Actions to be taken should be clearly identified as well as their ownerships. As workshops are progressively undertaken across the network, there will be opportunities for evaluation and improvement of procedures.
The risk is quite encouraging. It also, I believe, as opposed to the old systems, we take away clear proposals. I felt with the system we worked before, very subjective, nothing concrete about what we were going to do. It was just a gut feeling. I felt I was banging my head against a wall at times, arguing my corner. This system tends to get us working more as a group and coming up with a proper decision.
What we've done today, because I feel we've reached a goal. Okay, we didn't agree on everything, but we've reached a goal because Gilbert's demonstrated that, as Robert said. And yes, they can be tiring these days, but there's something different about today that it's made it different for us, and it wasn't a lunch, by the way.
But I think it has gone well from the discussions away from the table as well. I've learnt that the way that we're looking at the questions at the early part of the day was too technical, and we should have been looking at them in a more realistic approach.
certainly I think that it's been a very useful workshop. I think whilst a lot of the questions I have seen before, very similar questions in previous templated risk assessment sessions, I think these ones are they're actually a bit easier to answer in terms of leaving less doubt. You don't get people sort of thinking, what's the thrust of this question? The previous sessions I've been to have had a lot of that. A lot of it has been spent arguing about what the question is, and not arguing the answers to the questions in a constructive manner. So, from my point of view, that's a great improvement.
I was involved quite a few years ago in earlier layout risk assessment tools, and they were, I think, quite clumsy to say the least, and I think this is quite an improvement in that. It seems to follow through a lot better with the proposed mitigations and the graphs showing exactly where you are instead of just tons of figures that really didn't mean anything very much beyond the actual layout you were looking at. So it seems quite an improvement.
I think to me the key question really is the need to consider what are the infrastructure factors that lead to SPADs and what can be done to mitigate those features. And I think this sort of process is definitely a way forward in dealing with that.
As key players in the detailed assessments, you will provide a vital contribution to the progressive elimination of risk across the network. So please remember, this is not just another workshop.